may our ears be open to what Pastor Loren has to say. In your name, amen.
Very conscious of the time. I have a lot to say. I can see it's 25 but sometimes I just cannot see when the hands get close to the top of that clock there. I just can't. So, Rick, I've got a job for you. One, stay awake during the sermon. Two, when it gets to 5 to 12, can you just put your hand up 5 for me? That'll just give me a time to switch in. And then also board and admin, if you could look at ways of funding and getting a time clock put into the screen up there that's digital, that would make my life easier too, preaching. But there's just small pastoral wishes that you can have. It makes it a lot more practical. But also, I'm conscious of your time too. I'm conscious of all of us itching to go for a walk up Noble Falls this afternoon. So, yeah. But I was going to go straight into the sermon, but Di, you challenged me. I've got a few words to say. In regards to Op Shop for a Day. There's something that scares me about big, hairy, audacious dreams that God places on my heart and visions that He gives me when I first came into this community 4 years ago. I just want to see a church that embraces the community of Swan City, so much so that people just need to stand back and say, wow, how amazing is that God that works wonders through His church, His people. I believe that the church today is the vehicle that God uses to share His message to the world today. And I really believe in that. I'd die for that if I had to as a pastor. And I value all of you, and I value what we can do together as God's church. Some people think, Op Shop for a Day. It's just to, get rid of some of the excess clothes that we have building up. Yeah, it can do that. That's not the primary reason we do it. 2, raise money. Yeah, it does that. That's not the primary reason we do it. Here's why we do Op Shop for a Day. One is we want to, as a church, raise the standard of living in our community. There are people out there who can't afford to go into the shops to buy their clothes. And there are people here that will come in and buy the clothes for 50 cents, $2, $3. And so we are looking after those that we love already. And they'll come and they'll buy. We need to raise a presence in the city of our church, and that's what it does. Although it's called Midland Meals Op Shop for a Day, they know who we are. They know there's a church behind it that loves them. They're on the pathway of where people gather. Traditionally, years ago, people used to gather at the old shopping centre. Is it City Point or Centre Point, and the town hall. Now they're gravitating more to the new shopping centre, or newer shopping centre, Midland Gate, but still down there people do gather. They know where we are, they know where to come to. It's a meeting place for people. And then also, the reason we do this and look after people in our community, it could be you one day needing Op Shop for a Day. It could be me one day needing Op Shop for a Day. It also lets the leaders of our community know that we love them and value them. And you saw the letter that Di read out to us today. They know we love them. And they do incredible things behind the scenes that we can't really express too much. But they are for us. And we need to show them that we are for them. And the comments come back to us that the city is a better place because Midland Meals and Op Shop for a Day are there operating. So I want to just challenge you, be a part of the blessing. No matter what small or big way, get involved. If it's for an hour or 2 hours, come and say, Di, I've got 2 hours I'll give you. And you know what? It'll help me to look Di in the eye a bit easier next Sabbath and know that, hey, we've been a blessing to this community together, and we're also uplifted Di's vision for this community. A sermon is in the series of Hero Maker, and we've got number 3 in the series. Because of time, I'm not going back to back it up. If you feel a little bit lost this morning as to where I am, I'm right in the middle of our series. You need to go back and watch sermon number 1 and sermon number 2 I preached on this, because I'm serious. This is where the heart of church discipleship, this is where the heart of church ministry really is. And on my heart again this morning are messages I want you to hear. And I may highlight them and say you need to know this as we go through. Recently, I've been building chook houses. Well, they've been busted out of their other cages, and I've had them held in what I call the hatchery. I've had about 100 chooks in there, and I've been, on edge, very nervous, trying to get to it. I've been building those cages, and as I would be building out there in my spare moments and times I'd watch sometimes that Braden would wander over to me, and he'd be there watching. And I would be, hammering away or stretching the wire or cutting the wood in the right way that my dad had told me how to do it many, many years ago. In fact, I always look forward to long weekends because it reminds me of great memories of when my dad would get out with us boys and build chook cages or smash down chook cages. And I learned a lot watching Dad. I didn't realise, though, that Braden was watching me. And when I was somewhere else, on the back of the chook cage or on the roof, I'd hear the saw go. And what's he doing? I look over, he's copied me. He's measured the wood the way I do it. He's lined up with the saw, and he's cutting the wood. I'm thinking, heck, that's my job. What are you doing? He passed the wood up to me. I couldn't say a thing with a look on his face. Then I'm stretching the wire. I walk away to grab a drink or something. I see him over there. He'd been watching me, and he's there tapping the hammer and stretching the wire how I do it. Or he's passing up the next board that he knows I need. And little by little I realise that Braden is watching me. He's learning a tradition, he's learning a craft off me that my dad had passed to me. I'm learning a craft, or I learned a craft off my dad, that my dad's dad had passed to him. And I suddenly realised that Braden one day would build his own chook cages because he's learnt it off his dad. I saw with great thrill in my heart something I usually do. It's the final thing you do when you build a chook cage, is to go and gather the chooks, put them in your arms and bring them and put them in and release them in the brand new chook cage. While I'm still nailing the last nails on the roof, Braden thinks it's time. And he goes, he gathers the chooks, he brings them in, he gets the rejoicing, he gets the joy at seeing what's going on. There's something about passing on skills, dad to son, isn't there? Mum to daughter. When you think about it, I learned a lot from my dad. My dad taught me how to ride a bike. And that little beat-up bomb of a bike, I've still got it. It's a bone cruncher, but I've got it. And I found it the other day. I thought I'd lost it. I found it. It's been handed down to so many young boys like me. I learned off my dad how to garden, how to love roses that he would grow for my mum. I learned off my dad how to light a fire. My dad was Firecracker Harry. He'd love lighting fires. And whenever there was an opportunity, he'd grab an old kerosene tin, shove some paper, wood in it, and mould a bit of number 8 wire, bang a hole in the top, and there he'd make a handle. He'd carry this bucket around wherever he was working in the yard to keep himself warm, or to keep us kids warm as we're out there with him. My dad taught me many things, but more important, he taught me more important things. My dad taught me how to love God. My dad taught me how to love a wife. My dad taught me how to love my children. And my dad taught me how to love others. Yeah, my dad was human. He did some silly things. Human. But loved my dad. Because Dad taught me about life and taught me things. And you too may have dad, mum, maybe grandparents that have taught you things that you would never ever learn them in a classroom. You'd never ever learn them out of a textbook. Although my dad taught me much about the Bible and always opened the Bible to me and showed me how to read the Bible. And you'd never ever learn them from lecturing someone. It was through sharing life together that I learnt these skills off my dad. It was through, I would watch and he would explain to me what he was doing. Then he taught me side by side. Then he let me help him out. If I messed up, he'd encourage me. He poured his very life into me, and that's how I learned. He poured his very life into me, and that's how I learned. And that's how you make heroes. This is number 3 in our series of hero makers, and we're looking today at how to make disciples. Making disciples is through multiplying. Matthew 28, 18 to 20. And let's see, making disciples is at the very heart of God. Let's look at this again and remind ourselves. We've looked at it for the last 3 times I've preached. And Jesus came and spoke to them saying, all authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. And we know the rest of it really well. We've almost repeat it. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The greatest discipleship-making verses ever in the Bible. And I'm sure that most of you have memorized these verses. And from these verses, we're seeing that Jesus says, if you want to be a hero, it has to be through multiplying disciples. Now, here is the shift of thinking that you and I need to make in our church life to get to where Jesus is at with this passage. We need to shift from prioritising personal growth. Imagine where I'd be if my dad had kept his chook building skills to himself. Or imagine how I could love Sherelle if I'd never seen my dad love my mum. We have to shift from prioritising personal growth to prioritising the growth of others. That's the big shift our church needs to make. That's the game changer that we as a church need to make in order to chase after these last words of Jesus that are his last words of meaning to the church. Now, you might say, Loren, I'm all for personal growth. Well, I want to say right here now, there's nothing wrong with personal growth. There's nothing wrong with growing deeper with God. There's nothing wrong with drawing closer to Jesus. There's nothing wrong with improving our spirituality. It's all very well and good. But even here, we need to shift the priority from us to others. If the priority on growing deeper, on growing more spiritual and growing closer to Christ is all about us, we've just joined the shoppers down the local street in consumerism. We need to help others grow deeper with God and show them how to do it. We need to show others how to draw closer to Jesus. And we need to show others how to improve their spirituality. That's exactly what we are here for. If you read that text of Matthew 28, 18 to 20, that's what we're here for. We are not here for ourselves. We are here to grow others in discipleship with the Jesus we love and share so much. If we do this, we're growing God's kingdom. We have to shift from information sharing to life sharing. And that's going to be a hard shift for us at times, because we're all very good in gathering information and being in the latest Bible studies, being in the latest Revelation seminar, being in the latest app on TV, on our screens that brings us in more information. But if we are here to share the Great Commission that we love and know so well, we can only ever and will do it through life sharing. Absorbing it into my heart and then finding someone or others and saying, watch me as I follow Jesus. Watch me as I grow deeper with God. Watch me and I'll show you spirituality. Watch me as I fly the banner for Jesus in the very life that he's given me with. We have to shift from information gathering to life giving. It's a big shift, but we have to, as a church, do that in order to connect with the Holy Spirit's dream for Swan Valley Seventh-day Adventist Church. Peter is an example we can take some lessons from in the Bible. He was used greatly by God when the church was just a fledgling. Just after Pentecost, this baby church, as it was launched with the most powerful sermon by Peter, and we saw 3,000 people being baptized in that one day. What an amazing man. That is an amazing thing to do, an amazing scene to have happen there. Crowds have gathered here and they've heard Jesus' first sermon. And what does he tell them about? In his very first sermon, what does Peter tell this crowd about? Let's go to the passage now. It's a long passage. I'm not going to read it all through. It's Acts 2, 6 to 25. Just follow me through, guys. I'm not going to go too deep into it. And when the sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them in their own language. Then they looked, they were amazed and marvelled, and saying to one another, "Look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how it is that we hear each in our own language in which we were born." Now it's going to go through the names of them all. We'll just skip that through. Skip. Stop. For these are not drunk as you suppose, since it is only the third hour of the day. Let's keep moving through. But as it was spoken by the prophet Joel. So we find now it's grounded in the prophecies that they should have known about. And there's the prophecy, "I'll pour out my spirit on all flesh." We know it very, very well. Let's keep going further. Men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested by God to you by miracles, wonders and signs, which God did through him in your midst, as you yourself also know. And being delivered by the determined purpose and foreknowledge of God, you have taken by lawless hands and have crucified and put him to death. Let's stop there. That's Peter's sermon. What did Peter preach about? He preached Jesus. In his very first sermon, he preached Jesus. He preached Jesus as the promised Messiah. He preached Jesus as the one that was promised to come to them. He preached Jesus as the one that they crucified. He preached Jesus as the resurrected Jesus. He preached Jesus as the Jesus that was coming soon to take them all home. He preached Jesus that day in that pulpit that was given him when he won 3,000 people to Jesus Christ. And how did it happen? Peter wasn't just about sharing information. No, Peter shared his very life with them. Now, I can see my time. Yeah, I'm going to crank it up. Stay with me, put your seatbelts on. I'm halfway through my sermon. I'll pick it as much as I can apart, but stay with me, stay with me. Peter wasn't about sharing information. I just said that. Peter shared his very life. It says in Acts 2, 40-something, it said there that he shared it through fellowship, through meals, through prayers, through sharing all things in common. That's how the church grew there in Acts chapter 2. Of course they shared Jesus, but they shared Jesus in the walks of life. Now, where did they get this idea from? Where did they get the idea to share Jesus in the very life, to share Jesus in a practical way? They got it from Jesus himself. The disciples had spent 3.5 years with Jesus. And what had Jesus done in that time? They lived with Jesus, day by day. They ate. They shared. They ministered side by side with Jesus. Jesus taught them along the way. Come with me, and I'm giving my son a few heart attacks up there, I think. It's Luke 5, 1 to 11. And we find now Peter, this man who's preached the 3,000 baptized, this man who's multiplying souls for God's kingdom. Let's pick him up here where Jesus first found him. So it was as the multitude pressed about him to hear the word of God that he stood by the lake of Gennesaret and saw 2 boats standing by the lake, but the fishermen had gone from them and were washing their nets. Then he got into one of the boats, which was Simon's. It's Peter's boat. He's using Peter's boat as a pulpit. And he asked him to put out a little from the land, and he sat down and taught the multitudes from the boat. When he had stopped speaking, he said to Simon, "Launch out into the deep, let down your nets for a catch." But Simon answered and said, "Master, we've toiled all night and we've caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I'll let down the net." And when they had done this, they caught a great number of fish, and the net was breaking. And they signalled to the other partners in the boat to come and help them, and they came and filled the other boats, so they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees and said, "Depart from me, for I'm a sinful man, O Lord." For as all who were with him were astonished at the catch of Jesus which they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were all partners with Simon. And Jesus said to Simon, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will catch men." We see here a number of points. I need to bring them out. I need to stick close to my notes. When Peter first meets Jesus, he's out washing his nets. After the sermon from the boat, Jesus turns his eyes and his attention to Peter. He says, "Put out your nets." They get so many fish that it sinks almost 2 boats. We find in this instance, from the closing verse I just read to you, we find in this instance, Peter suddenly realises 2 things. He realises, 1, he is in the presence of divine power. Jesus is somebody from God. Secondly, he realises that he's not worthy to be an instrument. And aren't these 2 points things that God's disciples today need to know. We need to know that we are never ever out of the hands of divine power, who walks beside us. He says, "Lo, I'm with you always," in Matthew 28. We need to know as well and realise that we are just humble instruments. Anything glory we do for God has to go back to God. Luke 5 verse 10, we see that Jesus tells Peter, and so James and John, the sons of Zebedee, were partners with him. And Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on, you will catch men." That's Peter's job description from now on. Is he successful? Yes. He baptised 3,000 and more. But we need to learn from the life of Peter. Peter shared 3 years with Jesus, 3.5 years with Jesus. And that's the first thing in sharing, in being a hero maker. You need to share your life with those around you. Peter shared his life with others because he learned it from God. And to do this, we need 2 things. One, we need to share our life with others intentionally. My dad intentionally built lessons into my life. I'm now building lessons into Braden's life, Addison's life. You see, when God said to Peter, "From now on, you're going to make fishers of men," God said to Peter, "Peter, I know you're going to let me down. I know you're an up and down person. I know you're human. I know that all about you, Peter. But Peter, I have a plan for you. Peter, I have a purpose for you. Peter, I'm sending you on a mission to intentionally catch men for my kingdom." Jesus is intentional here because you don't catch fish by accident. I grew up with a neighbour called Sid. I'll try and tell the story quickly because I know what time is short. Sid was an absolute character. Sid absolutely abused his body. He was an old man by the time I got to know him, and he lived with Eiley next door to our house on our farm in Golgol there. Sid would never look after his health. And people would tell him, "Sid, you've got to give up the cigarettes, you've got to give up the cigarettes." Well, after a while, not giving up the cigarettes, he lost a leg. And so he used to hobble over our place or hobble around his property. We all had 5 acres each. He would hobble around on a walking crutch because he abused his body. Well, he didn't learn. Even though he was on one leg, he kept smoking and he lost the other leg. And so he'd walk around, or he'd get around in a wheelchair. And it was absolutely fun for us young kids at that age to watch him. He loved shooting clay pigeons, and he had made his own trap, and he'd shoot them out into the paddock over the vines and shoot them down. Well, one day we saw him out there shooting with a bit of a powerful gun, and he knocked himself out back in the wheelchair, straight backwards. And we had to go and help him back in again. Lovely guy, but absolute character. He was a very, very keen fisherman, and he knew how to fish. If he went out into the water with his wife or with friends, he knew exactly in that Murray River where to go to pull in beautiful golden perch. He knew exactly where to get them and where to get redfin. And we'd try to go over as kids or others, and we watch him go right in front of our eyes. We'd try and go there, and we couldn't pick it. We couldn't do it. We'd catch carp. His whole life was built around fishing. And so he had half drums there where he kept worms, and he'd come over and ask scraps from my mum in order to feed the worms, and the worms were the bait. He'd go walking along. Well, he had his legs, and he never did it after his wife did it afterwards when he lost his legs. But they had traps all the way along the river, and they'd catch yabbies, they'd catch shrimps, and that would be their baits. And they had equipment, they had eskies, and he had a lovely jetty he had built there that we used to jump off to swim off. But he built it for his fishing. Well, when he lost his legs, he went and got some old wood off the old bridge. He used to be a director of main roads, and so some of the old rejects wood that had been used for many years on the old rickety Mildura Bridge, he made a big ramp with steel and the wood, and he put a winch down the bottom, and he'd go down 60 metres down this, he'd tie the winch to his wheelchair, and he'd wind it and wind himself down to the boat and wind himself back up again. It was an amazing contraption, all built around fishing. What I learned from Sid, I learned these points. You have to have the right equipment to fish, and he had it. You had to have the right location to get perch. You had to have the right bait to catch perch. And if we want to be hero makers and disciple makers for Jesus, we have to follow this. We have to have the right equipment, the right location, and the right bait. We have to be intentional in how we share Jesus. Now, the right equipment, the right bait, and the right location, what is that for Seventh-day Adventist Christians? It's this, listen to me. When we fish for fishers of men, when we fish for souls for Jesus, our equipment is Jesus. And our desire to share his life. Our bait is love. Love for Jesus given to others because we know that God has a purpose for them. Our equipment is Jesus. Our bait is love. Our location to fish? Not in these four walls. We have to be intentional in how we share lives with Jesus and give lives Jesus. To do this, I want you to think of someone that you love and know, that you want to share Jesus with, that you want to disciple. And there are these principles that come through to make heroes, to make disciples, and I want to share them with you now. It comes from business schools, it comes from teaching school. First thing you need to do is, I do, you watch. Now, when my dad taught me, that's what I learned. Teaching Braden, that's what I'm doing. I do, you watch. Then secondly, I do, you help. Thirdly, you do, I help. Fourthly, you do, I watch. Fifthly, you do, someone else watches. And so the circle starts again. Can you see why making disciples for Jesus, sharing the everlasting gospel, the message, our last day message to the world, can't just be done through information, living life with these people? Where I do, you watch, I do, you help, you do, I help, you do, I watch, you do, someone else watches. And so the circle goes on. That's a very valuable 5 points I've given you there when it comes to making heroes of other people. This is where multiplication of disciples takes place. And you look at it, it's what Jesus did with his disciples. It's what Peter did with the first church because he caught it off Jesus. Okay, let's come back to Peter. Jesus is arrested and taken to be tried. Peter follows at a distance. You know the story well. And a little servant girl says to him and recognizes him and says, "You belong to him." And what does Peter do? He says, "No, I'm not." He denies it. He denies 3 times. In fact, he even calls down curses on himself in front of this girl. Peter denied he ever knew Jesus. A few days later, Peter finds the empty tomb where they had laid Jesus. finds it empty. He knew that Jesus was alive. And Peter is so embarrassed. Peter feels like a failure. He has let Jesus down. And what's going to be the consequences now? Where does he go? He goes back to familiar territory. He goes back to his comfort zone, back to the boats, back to fishing. He fished all night, didn't catch a thing, just like he did 3 years before. Once again, on the shore, Jesus appears. Now, I've got the passage. We're not going to read the passage because of the time, but I want you to get the message. So, with me, he's fished all night, just like 3 years before. Once again, Jesus appears, just like 3 years before. Why? Because Jesus is not done with Peter yet. He says to Peter, cast the net on the right side. Jesus made breakfast. What did he make for them? He made fish for breakfast. This is the third time Jesus appears to Peter after the resurrection. After making breakfast, he goes to Peter and says, Peter, we need to talk. We need to talk. Come for a walk with me. And Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you love me more than these? I wonder what he's pointing to. Is he pointing to the boats? Is he pointing to the fish? Is he pointing to the nets? Whatever it is, 3 times here, Jesus reminds Peter he's a failure. He's stuffed up. But in all of these 3 things, I wish we would have time to go through it. Every time he asks Peter, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Jesus meets Peter full of unjudgment. What an example to us in our disciple making. Jesus meets Peter full of unjudgment, and 3 times Jesus meets Peter in grace. In grace. Peter, I have a mission. Do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? But he's changed the metaphor from fish to sheep. If you love me, be a shepherd. If you love me, feed my sheep. First point was intentionality. My second point for the day is persistence. When it comes to discipleship, when it comes to passing on faith, when it comes to sharing with Jesus, you can't give up, you can never quit. Sometimes when we're fishing, we throw the lines in 3 or 4 times, no luck, we go home. I'm so glad Jesus never gave up on Peter, aren't you? We would never, ever read the book of Acts the same way that we do today if Jesus had given up on Peter. We would never, ever have Acts chapter 2. Jesus never gave up on Peter, and the same Jesus never, ever gives up on you. Jesus never, ever gives up on me. And all the people out there he's called us to reach, he never gives up on them. John Timberlake, he loved running. He was a first-year student at the University of Tennessee. He was a very good runner, and in the old metrics, he could run a mile in 4 minutes 8 seconds. But he was trying to get into the national races, into the nationals. And he had failed in 2 previous races. 1 race to go. If he failed, he was a goner. It was the last race, no more races. And so his coach, wanting help, rang up and got his two high school coaches to come. And they brought other colleagues from high school that knew John Timberlake really well. And they all made their way to the university this day for this last chance he had of making the Nationals. John set off really well, and it was a 3-lap race. He ran 2 laps really well, but he looked at those in front of him, and he was last. He looked at the crowd, and they were cheering their hearts out. And he thought, I am such a failure. They're all in front, I'm last, I can't do this. The crowd's even cheering for them. And so, at the start of the 3rd lap, he quit. Turned off the track, onto the side, and quit. His coach came running down to him. John, why'd you do this? John, what's going on? I'm a failure. I'm last. He said, no, you've run your personal best. The whole race is running a record time. And every runner that finished that day made it into the national races. John didn't, because John quit. What was John's problem? John looked around and thought where his position in life was. I'm last. John looked at the crowd and didn't realise they were cheering for him. He thought they were mocking him. He focused on the crowd and not the race. Church, we sit in the same place as John Timberlake. We focus on wrong things in life so much. We focus on the place we are in the race. We focus on the crowd. We focus on numbers. We focus on how many likes we have on Facebook. We focus on the car we drive or the house we buy or what others think of us too much. We lose sight as to why God has put us here and what God's plan is for us as individuals and His church. Hey, church, through you and me is the only plan Jesus has to touch others. He wants you to share your life with others. He wants you to pour your life into others. He wants you to realise it's not about you. It's not about us. It's never about us. It's always about His life with others through us. We lose sight, we give up too soon, so we quit when it comes to discipleship. Church, where are you focusing this morning? Your place in life is to do what Jesus calls us to do. Go make disciples of all men. Pouring our lives into them, the very life He's given us. And when we do that, it will change the church. When we do that, it will change the community. Church, I've gone over time. It's time to finish the sermon. You know what? It's time to go fishing. I hear the fish are biting. I hear the fish are biting.